Justice isn't blind. It's often biased. What happens when the system you trust betrays you? When the color of your skin makes you a target, even a child isn't safe. Then, a badge gleamed under the harsh streetlights, and a cruiser engine revved, a sound that would change everything. Officer Reynolds, fueled by racial prejudice, deliberately hits a young black boy with his patrol car. Panicking, he discovers the boy's father is a CIA agent. Agent Walker, driven by a father's protective rage, uncovers the truth and brings Reynolds to justice, but not before a tense confrontation and the involvement of other CIA operatives. How it begins? Officer Michael Reynolds patrolled the desolate streets of downtown, his heart thrumming with a mix of boredom and anticipation. It was a slow night, and the monotony was getting to him. He'd been on the force for 5 years, long enough to become jaded, but not long enough to lose that edge of nervous energy that came with the job. He harbored a quiet resentment, a simmering prejudice against the city's growing homeless population, many of whom were black. He saw them as a blight, a stain on the otherwise clean image of his precinct. He'd mutter under his breath about those people, how they were lazy, how they were ruining the city. He'd even had a few run-ins, using his authority to harass and intimidate them, a way to vent his frustrations. His partner, Officer Davis, sometimes gave him a look, a silent warning, but Reynolds always brushed it off. "Just doing my job," he'd say, a smirk twisting his lips. Tonight, that resentment found a focus. A young black boy, no more than 12, huddled in a doorway, seeking shelter from the biting wind. Reynolds felt a surge of irritation. Another one, he thought. Just what I need. He pulled the cruiser to a stop, the rumble of the engine cutting through the silence. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with fear. Reynolds sneered. "Get moving," he barked, his voice laced with contempt. "This ain't a hotel." The boy scrambled to his feet, clutching a tattered blanket. He didn't run, just shuffled away, head down. Reynolds watched him go, a smirk playing on his lips. He felt a perverse satisfaction in the boy's fear, a fleeting sense of power. He put the car in gear. Then, an idea sparked in his mind, cruel and impulsive. He accelerated, aiming the car directly at the boy. There was a sickening thud as the bumper connected with the child's legs. The boy cried out in pain and fell to the ground. Reynolds froze, his blood running cold. He hadn't meant to hit him that hard. Panic began to set in. He jumped out of the car and rushed to the boy's side. The boy was conscious, but his legs were twisted at unnatural angles. He was sobbing, his face contorted in pain. Reynolds' mind raced. He had to get out of there. He couldn't afford the paperwork, the investigation. It would ruin his career. He thought about his wife, Sarah, and their little girl, Emily. He couldn't lose his job. He needed that paycheck. He looked around frantically. No one had seen. Thank God, he thought. He scooped the boy up, his limp body heavy in his arms, and tossed him into the back seat of the cruiser. He sped away, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He drove to a secluded alleyway, his mind a whirlwind of fear and desperation. He pulled the boy out of the car, intending to leave him there, alone and injured. As he was about to drop the boy to the ground, he saw it. A small, leather-bound ID card had fallen from the boy's pocket. Reynolds picked it up, his hands trembling. He flipped it open. The card read, Central Intelligence Agency. Below it, a name, James something. The boy's father was CIA. Reynolds felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had just hit the son of a CIA agent. He was in deep trouble. What have I done? He thought, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked down at the boy, who was staring up at him with tear-filled eyes. Reynolds knew he couldn't leave him there. Not now. He had to get him help, but how could he explain what happened? He was trapped, caught in a web of his own making. He picked the boy up again, his hands shaking. He had to think fast. He had to come up with a plan. But what could he possibly do? He glanced around the dark alleyway, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp. He felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. He was in too deep. Then a sudden sound pierced the silence, the distinct click of a gun being cocked. Reynolds froze, his blood running cold. He slowly turned his head and saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It was a woman, her face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. In her hand, She held a pistol, aimed directly at Reynolds. "Don't move," she said, her voice low and menacing, "or I'll shoot." Reynolds' heart pounded in his chest. Who was this woman? How did she get here? He felt a surge of panic, but he knew he couldn't show it. He had to stay calm. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. The woman stepped forward, the light from the street lamp illuminating her face. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. She had a determined look on her face, a look that sent shivers down Reynolds' spine. "That's not important," she said, her voice cold and hard. "What is important is what you're going to do." Reynolds swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "You're going to take that boy to the hospital," she said, gesturing towards the back seat of the cruiser. "And you're going to tell them you hit him accidentally." Reynolds hesitated. He couldn't do that. It would ruin his career. The woman seemed to read his mind. "Don't even think about lying," she said, her voice dangerously low. "I know who you are, Officer Reynolds. I know about your little problem with prejudice. And I know you hit that boy on purpose." Reynolds felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. How did she know all that? Who is she? "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice barely a whisper. The woman smiled, a chilling smile that sent shivers down Reynolds' spine. "You can call me Agent Carter," she said. "And I'm here to make sure you do the right thing." Reynolds knew he had no choice. He had to do what she said. He got back in the cruiser and drove to the nearest hospital, Agent Carter following close behind. He carried the boy into the emergency room, his face a mask of concern. "My God, officer!" "What happened?" a nurse asked, rushing over. "He ran right out in front of me," Reynolds said, his voice trembling slightly. "I didn't have time to stop." The nurses rushed the boy into an examination room. Reynolds waited anxiously in the waiting area, Agent Carter watching him closely. He knew he was playing a dangerous game. If the boy's father found out what he had really done, he would be ruined. He thought about the ID card again. He had to get it back. He couldn't risk it falling into the wrong hands. He slipped out of the hospital and returned to the alleyway where he had found it. He searched the ground, but the card was gone. Someone must have picked it up. He felt a wave of panic wash over him. He had to find that card. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the boy was being examined by a doctor. The injuries to his legs were severe, but thankfully not life-threatening. The doctor noticed the boy seemed unusually quiet, withdrawn. "What's your name, son?" he asked gently. "Marcus," the boy whispered. "And your father's name?" Marcus hesitated. He had been told never to reveal his father's true identity. But he was scared, and he needed his dad. James Walker," he said finally. The doctor nodded. He knew something was wrong. He could see the fear in the boy's eyes. He suspected the police officer's story wasn't true. He decided to call the police and report the incident. He also made a note of the boy's father's name. Little did he know, this phone call would set off a chain of events that would spiral far beyond a simple hit-and-run. As he hung up the phone, a tall, imposing man in a dark suit walked into the hospital, his eyes scanning the room. It was Agent Walker, and he was looking for his son. Agent James Walker, a seasoned CIA operative with years of experience in the field, was used to danger. He'd faced down terrorists, infiltrated enemy strongholds, and navigated treacherous political landscapes. But nothing could have prepared him for the phone call he received that night. His son, Marcus, had been hit by a car. He rushed to the hospital, his mind a whirlwind of fear and anxiety. He found Marcus in a hospital bed, his legs in casts, his eyes filled with a terror that James had never seen before. "Dad," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "He did it on purpose. The policeman, he hit me." James felt a surge of rage, a primal instinct to protect his son. He knew Marcus wouldn't lie, not about something like this. But a policeman deliberately hitting a child? It seemed impossible. Yet, the fear in Marcus's eyes told him everything he needed to know. He spoke to the doctor, who confirmed Marcus's story. The doctor had his suspicions about Officer Reynolds, but he didn't have any proof. James knew he needed to find out the truth, and he knew just the people to help him. He made a few calls, activating his network of contacts within the agency. Within hours, a team of CIA agents was dispatched to investigate the incident. Meanwhile, Reynolds was still searching for the missing ID card. He knew it was only a matter of time before James Walker found out about his true identity, and he needed to get rid of any evidence that could link him to the crime. He returned to the alleyway, searching every nook and cranny, but the card was nowhere to be found. As he was about to give up, he saw a glint of metal in the dim light. He bent down and picked up a small, gold locket. It was engraved with the initials MW. He recognized it instantly. It was Marcus's locket, the one he always wore around his neck. Reynolds felt a surge of hope. Maybe he could use this to his advantage. Maybe he could bargain with James Walker, offer to return the locket in exchange for his silence. He returned to the hospital, his mind racing. He found James Walker in Marcus's room, his face etched with worry. Reynolds approached him cautiously, holding out the locket. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I found this in the alleyway. I think it belongs to your son." James Walker looked at the locket, then at Reynolds. He recognized the officer from the hospital. He took the locket, his eyes narrowing. "Thank you, officer," he said, his voice cold and hard. "But I think we need to have a little talk." Reynolds felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew he was in trouble. He had walked right into the lion's den. James Walker led him out of the room and down a long corridor. They stopped in front of a door marked security. James Walker opened the door, and Reynolds stepped inside. He found himself in a small, windowless room. There was a table in the center of the room and 2 chairs. James Walker gestured for Reynolds to sit down. He sat down opposite him, his face grim. "Officer Reynolds," James Walker said, his voice low and menacing, "I know what you did." Reynolds felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. He tried to deny it, but the words wouldn't come out. James Walker leaned forward, his eyes boring into Reynolds' soul. "You hit my son with your car," he said, "and you did it on purpose." Reynolds felt a wave of panic wash over him. He was trapped. He had no escape. This story highlights the devastating consequences of racial bias and abuse of power. It demonstrates how prejudice can lead to violence and injustice, impacting not only the victim, but also their family and community. It also shows the power of family bonds and the lengths to which a parent will go to protect their child. Finally, it emphasizes that even those who are sworn to uphold the law can be the ones who break it, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, can ultimately prevail. What happens next? Will Reynolds face the full consequences of his actions? Will Marcus fully recover from his injuries, both physical and emotional? What will be the fallout within the police department and the community? Share your thoughts in the comments below.